Trump's rumble with Zelenskyy is still sending shockwaves around the world. If Ukraine falls, is Taiwan next? Welcome to China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. Trump's meeting with Zelenskyy sure sent shockwaves around the world. Before I get into that, real quick, thank you to the more than 5,000 of you who have signed this petition so far, telling Apple to not block our China Uncensored mobile app. As I said in previous episodes, we submitted our China Uncensored iOS app to Apple on January 24th. We're supposed to hear back with approval or rejection if they want us to make changes within about 5 business days. It's now been 40 days. No word from Apple. And a lot of people are concerned that Apple is soft censoring us by trying to simply ignore our application forever. The last time Apple censored us was in 2017, when they blocked the China Uncensored TV app from Taiwan and Hong Kong. We launched a petition and got nearly 10,000 signatures, got some media attention, and then Apple suddenly unblocked our app, mysteriously and without any comment as to why. Surely it was some kind of technical error and not some intentional act of censorship related to their billions of dollars a year of revenue from China. Well, probably it's the same thing now, which is why it's so important that you sign this petition and get us to 10,000 signatures. I'll have a link to the petition below. Now back to the episode. Trump is making Taiwan more vulnerable. That's according to the Council on Foreign Relations. And they're not the only ones who are worried, especially after the friendly debate between Trump and Zelenskyy last week, and Trump's decision to pause U.S. military aid to Ukraine in response. According to NBC, the Trump-Zelenskyy clash marks a defining turn away from America's defense of democracies, and according to Carnegie Endowment, a U.S. retreat from democracy. In truth, it's a win for China, Western officials say. And it's turning the world upside down into a dark, fretful, more dangerous place where treaties and laws are no longer respected, alliances are broken, trust is fungible, and principles are negotiable. And morality is a dirty word. Thanks for the darkly poetic quote, Ghost of Hunter S. Thompson. To many, Trump has full-on betrayed Ukraine, even though we don't actually know what his peace plan is yet. And now people are wondering if Trump will betray Taiwan next. According to the New York Times, Taiwan is watching as Trump undercuts Ukraine, hoping it won't be next. The Guardian says Taiwan is holding its breath as Trump turns on Ukraine and upends U.S. foreign policy. AP says Trump's abrupt change of U.S. policy on Ukraine raises questions about Taiwan support. Obviously, let's all just forget about the fact that a couple weeks ago, China was fuming at Trump for a Taiwan-friendly change of wording on the State Department's website. No, Taiwan is in trouble. That's why the term today Ukraine, tomorrow Taiwan started trending in Taiwanese media. According to DW, Trump's signals to Europe prove the U.S. is no longer committed to protecting Taiwan. This is a fear you'll see all over social media. Will the U.S. abandon Taiwan? Or force it into a deal with the devil? Is Japan next? Will it be forced to say sayonara to Okinawa and the Senkaku Islands for China? Or what about South Korea? Has the U.S. become the bad guys now? Will Trump tell the Avengers to stand down and let the Chitauri take New York? These are questions lots and lots of people are asking now, and it's leading to some interesting conclusions. Some, like former Taiwanese lawmaker Wang Yisheng, argue that Taiwan should try harder to balance relations between China and the U.S. to avoid being sold out by Trump, because tipping the scales towards a country that wants to invade you has always worked out well for Taiwan, especially if you own stock in a bomb shelter factory. European leaders certainly took the opportunity to grandstand their credentials as defenders of democracy. French President Macron asked how Trump can be credible in the face of China if he's weak in the face of Putin. Other leaders claim Trump is no longer an ally, and that it's up to Europeans to show leadership of the free world. Europe's leadership of the free world against the threat of Russia has been a bit lackluster up to this point. On top of basically doing nothing in response to the 2014 invasion of Crimea and not spending nearly enough on its own security, the EU spent more on Russian oil and gas than financial aid to Ukraine, and is sitting on $300 billion in Russian assets without using it to support Ukraine, while deepening trade with China, which in turn helps fuel Russia's war effort as well as China's own. I'm not hopeful that if China invaded Taiwan, Europe would act any differently. On top of that, you have European envoys telling Asia that it should not have to pick between the US and the likes of China, while no one in Europe seems to have any concrete plans on how to actually finish the war in Ukraine.
I asked people, what is the European plan to end this war? I can tell you what one foreign minister told me, and I'm not going to say who it was, but I can tell you what one of them told me, and that is that the war goes on for another year, and at that point, Russia will feel so weakened that they'll beg for a peace.
Yeah, and if that doesn't work out, then they'll just go at it for another year, and another. Eventually, Russia will get so tired of brutalizing Ukraine, they'll leave its ashes alone. Given its track record with Ukraine and its deep, deep ties with China, will Europe actually do what's necessary if China invades Taiwan? Meanwhile, Trump's track record shows that he isn't exactly a dictator's darling. In a 2018 NATO summit, Trump warned that Germany would be a, quote, captive of Russia if it allowed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. They laughed at him, which was historic, as it may have been the only time I've ever heard of Germans laughing at anything. They're a stoic people. Under Trump's leadership, the US military killed hundreds of Russian mercenaries in Syria. And before leaving office, before Russia even invaded, Trump approved $250 million in lethal aid to Ukraine, which the Biden administration froze. There are also the many ways Trump has set in motion a radical change from traditional US-China engagement and appeasement to treating China for what it is, an adversary that's bent on world domination. Even the Biden administration carried on a lot of Trump's policies, such as tariffs, military aid to the Asia-Pacific, and more. This time around, Trump has appointed a lot of people who are critical of China, including the likes of Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Navy Undersecretary Hung Cao. So if this is courting dictators, then Trump needs some serious dating advice, because trying to crush their economy and kill their soldiers ain't how you get to second base. More recently, Trump made a massive move against China. It's called the America First investment policy, and it hits China where it hurts most, its wallet. I highly recommend you watch my breakdown of that memorandum. The link is below, but by way of one example, Trump wants to charge every Chinese-made ship $1 million for every port call in the US. It's possible the reason why Trump is pushing so hard for a peace deal in Ukraine is so that the US can focus more on fighting China. And Trump wants to finish the fight with China so he can focus more on his true passion, weird trolly AI posts. In addition, Trump might be looking at history for guidance here. After all, this isn't the first time the US has had to make tough choices. During the Korean War, President Eisenhower opted to end it by splitting the Korean peninsula. The South Korean president at the time opposed it. That's why the truce was only signed by the US, North Korea, and China. Eisenhower understood that North Korea, with the support of China and the Soviet Union, were the aggressors. But he also knew that completely unifying Korea under the South would cost far more lives and resources, and in doing so, hinder the US's broader efforts to counter Soviet influence globally. By splitting up the Korean peninsula, Eisenhower helped South Korea survive, to become the modern, prosperous democracy that it is today, and freed up resources to fight the Soviet Union elsewhere. Just as the US needs to worry about China today. A lot of people argue that supporting Ukraine to get everything it wants is the only acceptable way to counter authoritarians like Russia and China. After all, if the US lets Russia get away with getting its objectives, wouldn't that send a message to China that it can do the same with Taiwan? China definitely needs to hear that it will suffer high costs if it does something as stupidly dangerous as invade Taiwan. However, if the US completely depletes its financial and military reserves in Ukraine, it could actually encourage a Chinese invasion of Taiwan because the US wouldn't be able to come to Taiwan's aid, especially considering China's economy and military might is much, much greater than Russia's. A lot of people are ticked off with the way Trump deals with other countries. They criticize him for being too transactional. Chengfeng Yu at Soochow University in Taipei argues that if everything is transactional, then that solid relationship is gone. But it could be said that by making things transactional, you actually make relationships more solid. For years, I've seen how the brutalities of the Chinese Communist Party have been ignored on the global stage. All the beautiful talk of human rights and democracy get thrown out the window when money is on the line. So what if instead of appealing to vague, abstract ideas like defending democracy, What about demanding something more tangible, such as, say, a minerals deal? You ensure that people actually have a stake in something. Human rights and democracy become profitable. This in turn could force adversaries to think twice before doing something that would elicit a strong response. As much as people criticize Trump for saying things like Taiwan should pay more to the US and threatening tariffs, what Trump is demanding could actually help solidify the US's commitment to Taiwan far more than just saying we need to defend democracies. Or to paraphrase the great geopolitical thinker Beyonce, if you like it, then you should have put a ring on it made from rare earth minerals. Getting things like the $100 billion investment from Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing would make it so that the US has to ensure it gets its money's worth. It also further justifies to domestic audiences why defending Taiwan is worth it, who want to know why they're sacrificing American money and maybe even American lives on the other side of the world. What do you think? Leave your comments below. We're all about freedom of expression, so no judgment. But do you know who might not be a big fan of freedom of expression? That's right, Apple, which just so happens to rely on the China market for more than $50 billion in revenue per year. So much for human rights and democracy. Weird coincidence that Apple is refusing to process the China Uncensored app we submitted nearly 6 weeks ago. So click below and sign this petition to tell Apple to not censor the China Uncensored app. Remember, we need at least 10,000 signatures, so don't wait. I'm Chris Chappell. Click below.